once again, thank you all for joining us. If you're just tuning in here, we are hosting John Moe tonight for his book, The Hilarious World of Depression. As you might know, John is a national public radio figure who is the co-creator of a show called Wits. He's also appeared on Weekend America, All Things Considered, and Morning Edition. His new book is called The Hilarious World of Depression, which takes off where his popular podcast is left off, talking about his life and also about the podcast, which talks to famous comedians and celebrities about their journeys with depression. John is also the author of Conservatize Me, a lifelong lefty's attempt to love God, guns, Reagan, and Toby Keith, The Deleted Emails of Hillary Clinton, a parody, and a book called Dear Luke, We Need to Talk, Darth, and other popular culture correspondences. I have to say the titles of your books are some of the best that I've heard, John. How are you doing? John's with us tonight, coming at us from St. Paul, Minneapolis. Welcome.
Thank you. So Amanda, I want to thank you for putting St. Paul before Minneapolis. It's so often the other way around.
Minnesota is what I meant to say.
Yeah. No, St. Paul's kind of we consider it the bookish older sister to Minneapolis.
It's a great book city. Minneapolis and St. Paul. What a fabulous literary scene there.
Well, I'm doing well. I'm holding it together as best anybody can, and that is the minimum and maximum requirement for anybody out there in the world these days.
Agreed.
All right, should I just dive in, talk about some book?
Let's dive in. We'll do a Q&A at the end. So if you think of a question while John's talking, if you want to just pop it into the chat, we'll get to that after he does a little reading and telling us about the new book. Take it away.
Thank you. I was talking to a bookseller in Virginia recently, and they said that there's a thing now in some of these virtual bookstore events where somebody's hearing about a book and listening to the author. The whole event is hosted by one of these wonderful independent bookstores, and then people run off and buy it on Amazon. So I'm asking you to please not do that. Please buy this one from Bookworks. It's so important to support the smart and friendly people at our independent bookstores. And so please consider doing that. And, it helps me when you buy books as well. An update, because a lot of people are curious, the show, The Hilarious World of Depression, the podcast, has ended its run at American Public Media. And so rather than say the show is over and the show is canceled and it'll never happen again, note how I am not saying that. It's merely ended its run one place. And the future looks bright, and I'll have stuff to announce at some point. So let's talk about the book, though, the thing that can never be canceled. And that's The Hilarious World of Depression. And in these situations, I often don't know where to start in terms of how the book got started. In the writing of the actual book, it picks up around junior high. In the first draft I did of it, the blame for my many decades of dealing with chronic major depressive disorder fell to Otto von Bismarck in the 19th century, because he set in motion the events that led to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which set off World War I, which, come on, set off World War II. And World War II involved Hitler's Nazis storming into Norway, where my parents were growing up. My dad was born in 31, my mom was born in 34. And all the trauma that came from having an army of Nazis invade your country. And I'll avoid any parallels for right now to our country in the interest of time. And so they dealt with trauma. My dad dealt with it the only way he knew how, the only way that was available to men of his generation, with alcohol and cigarettes. And so I skipped a lot of that. I went back and talked about it a little bit in the book. But it comes up to junior high, which was my first way of knowing what was going on. And then it just remained a mystery for decades. I'm often a little slow to catch on to things. So that's why it might have taken so long. I never figure out twists in M. Night Shyamalan movies, for instance. It's always blows my mind. Like my wife and I went to see The Crying Game when it first came out. And when there's the big reveal at the end of The Crying Game, I was like, what? And I look at my wife and she's just sort of shaking her head like, and she married me anyway. So that's cool. But no, I had this thing that I didn't know what it was for a long time, where I would go into, in junior high, it took the form of just hopelessness, crying for to the point where I thought something was wrong with my tear ducts, and not like sobbing, but just can't stop crying. The suicidal ideation came later, and just sort of this lingering sense that I could go out and do things. I could meet people. I could go to college. I could get jobs. I could, get married. I could do all these things, but there was something fundamentally wrong and worthless about me. And that's just something that I knew inherently. And even if I had, success or, joy that other people were able to have, there was still a big part of me that said, you're garbage though. And I really believed it because I thought it was logical. I thought it was an inherent belief. People with depression have this corroded sense of self, or a non-existent sense of self, where you have an inner belief that ultimately he ain't worth anything. And so that also took the form of me never thinking that something might be wrong. I knew the problem, which was that I was weird and weak, and I must never tell anybody this terrible secret. And the thing is, though, that after a while, an illness like depression gets tired of riding in the back seat, wants to drive the car. And I turned out to have a type of depression that responded to stress. And so when the going got tough, I went to pieces. And it first came up, it would show up through the years. But for a while I worked at Amazon.com in the late 90s, early aughts. And I would be on deadlines there. I write about this in the book. I'm on a tough deadline to launch an impossible project in an impossible amount of time, because that was the tradition. And I started getting these thoughts of suicidal ideation, which were surprising to me. And I ultimately left Amazon and felt better, but then, life just, usually if there's something wrong early on, it's going to go into dormancy. It's not really going to go away. So you might not notice it as much until it's ready to really attack. So I'm in my mid 30s and I start to, I have a career that I can take seriously. I'm married. We have 2 kids. We own a house. And I'm doing a job I love. And, I'm so happy with the people that I love in my family. But I start spiraling and I start kind of falling apart. I start falling really out of contact with the world. I'm incredibly irritable and kind of nasty to people who love me. I get bouts of road rage where, I'm saved by my physical cowardice, because it never involves getting out and punching someone because I'm too scared to do that. But it just involves going insane inside my car, which is not a good thing. And so finally my wife says, well, maybe you should go talk to someone. You should go talk to a doctor about this thing, because I think you have depression. And I said, well, no, I don't even like the Smiths. I'm not a Morrissey fan. I'm not moping. I'm not just, laying around the house going, oh, and she said, that's not really what depression is. It can take a lot of forms. It has a lot of symptoms. And, maybe you can, just go talk to someone. And I didn't want to do it for two reasons. One, and this will make all the sense in the world to someone who has dealt with depression, and it will make no sense to somebody who has not dealt with depression. I didn't want to waste the doctor's time. I thought there's people out there, who really deserve a doctor's attention more than I do. I was ranking it. I was doing triage, even though talking to people about what might be wrong is what a doctor does. That is their job description. And I always tell people too, like, if you think you're having a problem with mental illness and you don't want to wait the 2 years or whatever it is to get an appointment with a psychiatrist, just go to a family doctor, go to a general practitioner. They can help you in the moment and help you devise a longer term plan, but you don't have to feel the way you're feeling right then, and they can help you with that. And that's important to remember. The other reason I didn't want to go to the doctor was I said, well, I don't want to do a copay. It's so expensive. And at the time, our health insurance had a copay of $10. And this was when I was like 36 years old. It took me a long time to figure out what was going on. And my wife said, well, okay, you don't love yourself enough to do this. Do you love me and the kids? I said, yeah. She's like, okay, then go do it for us, which is what I did. And I got diagnosed, and it was wonderful because I figured out for the first time, or learned really for the first time, that it was something I had and not something that I was. I had been sick this whole time. I always think of it, I don't even know, nerds can probably tell me. In Lord of the Rings, there's that king who's like all withered and dying, and then something happens, and then he's suddenly fine, and he's running around and he's waving swords. So I felt like, oh, okay, I just need a magic amulet or something that they have in Lord of the Rings. I'm getting Lord of the Rings wrong, but it was a similar transformation. So I talk about that in the book, and I talk about the of how, oh, Janie, hi, about the difference that made in my life. And there's a turning point in the book where my brother Rick, who had addressed the problems in his life not through alcohol like our dad did, but through drugs. And he had a tough life of various addictions, and he died by suicide in 2007. And so I talk about what I learned from that, what that trauma did, what that trauma taught me, and my transformation really from not knowing much about depression to deciding that this is what I need to do. This is what I need to talk to people about. And I've been talking about it ever since. And then a few years ago, there was a chance for me to invent a new show. And I noticed that whenever I talk to people about mental illness, people really seem to respond. Because what had happened was I was at my brother's service in Seattle, where I'm from. And there was all these people at this service. So it's like imagine like a church, and like, you go in the lobby, and then you go in the actual chapel for the service. And then there's like punch and mingling around Lutherans. And so all these friends of the family had shown up, these people who Rick should have been at their funeral, right? And so they come up and talk to me, because that's what you do at one of these things. And you say, oh, I'm so sorry about Rick. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry too. He was sick, and we had no idea how much. I had no idea he was ever depressed until he died. And so these people would say, well, well-meaning, nice people would say, well, I just remember all these things about Rick, all the camping trips we used to take with, 2 or 3 families, and all these pranks that he used to play, which were harmless and sophisticated and funny. And I just remember how smart he was, and how he loved animals. And I said, yeah, that's all true. You did know Rick until he was about 13. And at age 15, someone handed him a joint and he accepted it. And then he went down a long, dark road and he got mentally ill and he messed himself up. And methamphetamine can do a lot of damage to someone. Compulsive personality can do a lot of damage when that person goes to casinos. He had a lot of mental illness. He got himself sober just before he died. And he spent the last few years of his life volunteering, 30 hours a week on a sobriety hotline, convincing other people that their lives were worth living. But he could never believe that about himself because he thought that he was weak and bad because he was depressed. And then those friends of the family would say, oh, I should go talk to anyone else, and excuse themselves and go talk to my probably more accommodating siblings and mother. And this kept happening. And I was thinking about, all the times that someone who dies by suicide, it's talked about as like, oh, well, they died suddenly, they died unexpectedly. And it's kind of, there's an implication of shame to it. When in fact, that person was just incredibly sick and in terrible health. And this was the kind of thing that can happen when someone is in a really bad way with depression. And I thought about it, I'll never forget it. And I write about it in the book. I'm at this church and I'm thinking, okay, so Rick never talked to anybody about what was wrong. He kept that inside. If he had opened up to me about it, I would share everything I had already learned about depression after being diagnosed myself. I would help him find therapists to talk to, and this is in a pretend world where my regret lives, and he could start to open up. And if someone can talk about this stuff, there's a chance they can get better. It's not a guarantee, but it's a chance. If they never talk about these things, if no one talks about these things, then there's no chance it'll get better, and it might get a hell of a lot worse. And so why the hell are we choosing option B as a society? Why, that's the dumbest thing I could ever imagine. Like, you mean all we need to do is talk and this will get better, and we opt not to? Fuck that. And so I decided right then, fine, I'll be the loudmouth. I've been a loudmouth my whole life. I turned into a professional communicator. I'll talk. I'll talk all the time. I'll reveal stuff about myself. That's fine. Because it's too late for Rick, but maybe it's not too late for someone else. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since, in one form or another, in one platform or another. And so the Hilarious World of Depression came about when I had done this marvelous show called Wits for many years. It was a comedy variety show. And we're sneakily doing some more of them now, more episodes. And I got to know all these musicians and comedians who had dealt with depression. And what I noticed about it was that they could put depression in terms that connected with people. Like you think about a good comedian, a good, smart, good person comedian, I should say, I guess. They'll make an observation or an insight about society, about people, about something, and they'll phrase it in such a way that it'll connect with the part of you that has thought something but never shared it with the world. They'll say something about, whether it's about being in the grocery store or, dating, whatever it is, and it'll connect with you, and you'll say, oh my God, somebody else knows this, somebody else understands this or has felt this. And then you laugh, and the laughter comes from a sense of relief. Oh, I'm not alone. Oh, I'm part of a group. Oh, I have support. I'm like, because life is a sort of cruel joke of like, here, you're on a planet for a while, but you're gonna die. And you're gonna be sad and hurt many times along the way. But that laugh comes from, at least I'm I have the warmth of my fellow humans. And similarly, a musician, can sing a verse that puts so many things into your heart that you can connect with it, and this beauty of the world that they can give you. And so the proposition of the show is really, what if we did that with depression? What if we had these brilliant treasures in our world, professional communicators, to talk about something that is colorless, formless, odorless, doesn't show up on an X-ray or a CT scan. That I've now written a book about depression and hosted this show about depression. I can't define it. I was on Dan Savage's podcast, and he said, well, what is depression? I'm like, it's this thing, and it's kind of like a tree. The book is full of just analogies because it's impossible for me to come up with a description. I mean, I'm sure the dictionary has, but William Styron wrote this wonderful book about depression, and he's an okay writer. Styron couldn't even put a finger on it. So that was the idea, is like to talk about this thing in a way people understand, in a way people connect with, and in a way that makes people know they're not alone. And so when I was approached to write a book about it, I had interviewed dozens of people, but I felt like it was time to tell my own story about what I had been through. And boy, if you want to get a deeper understanding of yourself, write out your life story. It was an amazing experience. The first draft of this book was about 180,000 words, which would have been about a 600-page book. And we already have a Karl Ove Knausgaard. We don't need another one in me. And so, I trimmed it down and pared it down. But it's meant to be something that you can read quietly or listen to quietly, on your own, and make your own connection, and maybe know that this is what people with depression go through. And so if you have been, then it's then you have that connection. If you know somebody in your life, if you haven't dealt with it, lucky you, but somebody has, a family member, a coworker, a friend, a neighbor, it's a way for you to understand them a little bit better. And that's why I came to this thing of like, who do you want to dedicate the book to? And I was like, I've already done one to my wife. I've already done one to my kids. So it's dedicated, it says, for you and someone you know. It's a book designed to be shared. Like buy a copy through Bookworks, not through Amazon, and then pass it along. Like I wanted to share something that was a physical object, or go to the Bookworks website and have them mail a copy to your friend, whatever you want to do. But I find that I gravitate towards occasions when I can connect with people about the book, like the intimacy of the podcast, the intimacy of the book, is really what I'm after. And and to get some friggin' jokes about it. I'm often asked if I think depression is funny, and the answer I've been using lately is that it's funny like Groucho Marx is funny. So like I'm a big fan of the movie Duck Soup, Marx Brothers movie, and in it, Margaret Dumont, the ongoing haughty straight man character for the Marx Brothers, is putting on this very fancy state dinner, and dignitaries from all over are there, and they're dressed in their finest clothes, and the catering is perfect, white tablecloth. It is an elegant affair, and good for her. It's probably helping the cause of international relations and diplomacy. There's nothing wrong with what she's doing. And if you were a guest at this thing, you'd be like, wow, this is classy. I'm so I'm honored to be here. I'm going to have a wonderful time. And here comes Groucho to just fuck everything up. And he's, his idiot friends are there and they're, insulting people and knocking things over, and everybody's getting upset at them, but they don't care. They just do it some more. And Groucho is horrible. He's being a horrible person, but it's so funny. And that's what depression is to me. Like that something could be so disruptive and disregarding of how things ought to be is an inherently funny situation. A shorter version of why I think depression is funny is like those stories that you hear about where a 4-year-old somehow drives a tractor into town 30 miles. Like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't get hit by a car. This is horrible and dangerous, but it's some funny stuff. So that's kind of where that comes down. I'm going to read a couple things here and then we could do some questions. So put your questions in the chat, and Amanda is going to be going through those. And you might have more questions after we're done. And you've bought your book from Bookworks and not Amazon. And you could just tweet those to me. That's fine. I'm at John Moe. So I'm going to read a little bit here from the first chapter. And this is, there's swears, I should say. And, it's Don Henley's birthday today. And I say mean things about Don Henley because fuck Don Henley. So I'm writing about how I have a type of depression that relates to stress. And I'm writing about this when I'm at my first appointment with a new therapist, who I saw earlier today, still my therapist. And yes, there's always stress in life. We all go through stuff. But the rate at which I metabolized stress into depression had gone through the roof. It was a brutally efficient machine. What do you have to be stressed about? The Normies might have said, if I ever talked about these things with normal people. You have a family, a house, a car, a good job. Just deal with it. I should say, I refer in the book to people without depression as normies, people with depression as sadies. It's efficient. You have a family, a house, a car, a good job. Just deal with it. As if I could simply do that, as if I chose this, as if I looked at the options available to me and they were clearly labeled perseverance and freaking the fuck out all the time. And then I calmly said, yes, I select option B. Normies and sadies are different, you see. Let's say there's a long bridge going over a high canyon, and there are 2 cars on it, on the bridge, one for the normies and one for the sadies. The normies are in a big land yacht of a Buick, weighs a ton, low to the ground. When a stiff wind blows, the normies feel a mild push but continue driving, perhaps casually noting that it's getting windy out there. Then they go back to listening to, Foo Fighters. The sadies are piled into a Model T with a sail on top of it for some reason. They see the wind coming, and it's all they can do to keep from being blown off the road and plunging into the canyon. The normies see the sadies struggle and wonder what the problem is because to them, the wind doesn't seem that bad. Try being more positive, the normies shout, as the sadies Model T goes tumbling off the side and the sadies deploy the parachutes they've gotten used to wearing. I'd had good therapists in the past, briefly, but all I ever took away from therapy was a somewhat clearer understanding of how messed up I was. That's helpful, sure, but it's not really progress. It's like knowing the brand of refrigerator that you're locked in. And this was not the fault of the therapists I had seen, who were all trained pros and good at their jobs. It was my fault, or Clinny D's fault. We call depression Clinny D. I never wanted to go all that deep in therapy because that's where the monsters were. I'm talking about the really, really bad memories, the deep bruises, the scars, the events that significantly shape a person through trauma. Rather than tackle the past, I was willing to settle for a tense ceasefire with it, letting my life be like Middle East countries that hate each other. Yeah, there would be car bombings, but a homeland is a homeland. I had gone through life with the belief, often heard in simple-minded quarters of popular psychology, that the past is the past and you just have to go on. let it, or have to move on. Let it go, the simple-minded say. Again, as if no one had ever tried that before. Don Henley and Glenn Frey wrote a song along these lines called Get Over It. My response song would be called Fuck Off, Don Henley and Glenn Frey. You don't know what you're talking about. I suspect that most people who choose the willfully simplistic Henley Frey method are people who've never had much unpleasant stuff in their past to begin with, because this notion is some bullshit. If you can't understand your past, then you don't really know how your mind got to where it is now, because you simply don't know yourself. Making matters worse, depression causes the sadie to lose hope. It inserts despair where hope should go, and you're left at least suspecting, if not believing in your heart, that nothing will or even could get better. So to figure things out, I mean, depression doesn't even want you to get up, take a shower, and brush your teeth. So something like figuring out how your own mind works feels about as easy as taking a bus to Mars. So that's early in the book. I wanted to get to another thing here where I talk about different ways people treat depression, because it's incredibly varied. Nothing works for everybody, but often you can find something that works for most people, for most anybody. The way I handle it isn't going to be the same as you handle it. So it's like a trial and error thing with a lot of trial and a lot of error. So in the book, I talk about, just to kind of take an inventory of myself, some unusual ways besides therapy and medication that I'm able to have a really great life. And I should say I'm in great mental shape right now. I've found a lot of things that work for me, and I've done a lot of work to understand what's going on. And I still get sad, and I also get happy, but not all the time. And I have, a full life. Somebody on Twitter had said, well, I don't want to take pills that make me happy all the time. And then there was a reply that said, first of all, why wouldn't you? That sounds so great. But secondly, that's not how meds work. So I talk in this chapter about being in a band, and also about dogs and the importance therein. And this is a section called Videos of Spooky and Possibly Fake Things. When life gets extra difficult, I watch videos about ghosts, Bigfoots, and UFOs on YouTube. It's not that I necessarily believe in the veracity of these videos with highly dubious credibility. I rarely do, but I do believe that there's more to the world than what we've proven or observed. I'm a fan of the idea that there might be something hidden and wonderful out there. My dad loved telling ghost stories from the times he went camping with his father in Sweden. In one story, they were driving on a country road at night and kept having to stop because they'd see feet crossing the road in their headlights. My grandfather would get out of the car, confused as to why there were so many people at night in the countryside, and see no one. As the story went, after this had happened a few times, he finally saw several pairs of feet stopped and facing the car at close range. He got out again and saw no people, only the remains of a bridge that had collapsed. So it was a warning. As I type this now, I get thoughts like, wait, they never owned a car. And, and also, I know for a fact that when they camped, they took the bus. And also, what kind of headlights only show you the road at feet level? But at the time, the moral of the story was very inspiring. It was always, ghosts are real, and to a lesser extent, dead Swedes are concerned about traffic safety. We tended to see ghosts on camping trips in the summer. On a camping trip to Vancouver Island, Canada, we visited an old military fort that had been converted into a park. We were free to roam around the somewhat dilapidated concrete bunkers, but the rooms themselves were locked. One bunker had a grating on the door we could look through, and we saw a faint glowing light that came and went. There was no doubt in my mind that this was a ghost, and a rare daytime one. Later on that same trip, I was walking on the side of the road with Lisbeth, my sister. The road was on a hill, and a red convertible came down the hill with a smiling bald guy in the passenger seat and no one in the driver's seat. The bald guy smiled and waved at us as we gawked. Who was driving the car? A ghost, that's who. A few months ago, I suggested to Lisbeth that it was probably a British car, and I think she was disappointed by this explanation. For a depressed kid, a kid who didn't realize he was depressed, a kid who thought he was just shamefully weird, the ghost world was a tremendous comfort. As awful as the real world could sometimes be, it wasn't the only world out there. There was at least one other world where you got to float around, mess with people, and do cool magic things like go through doors. You even get to stay up late at night. And if there was a ghost world, there could be other worlds too. The existence of ghosts pointed to the existence of more than just this life in my house with this family and these schools, and a future where no one would ever marry me or hire me for a job. Also, I did love my family, and I kind of dug the idea that once we all died, we could either hang out on clouds in heaven or fly around bothering people as ghosts. Bigfoot offered something similar, but smellier and meatier and more immediate. For a kid in the Pacific Northwest, Bigfoot wasn't a legend or a mystery. It/he was a fact. Everyone knew that Bigfoot was native to our part of the country and had been spotted many times and talked about in Native American legend forever. So when a rumor got around in third grade that a Bigfoot had been captured alive, we all believed it without reservation and looked forward to reading about it when it eventually came out in the printed newspapers. The 70s were a big time for foot kind. The $6 Million Man fought one on TV, and there was a burst of documentaries produced with rickety cameras and even more rickety journalistic practices. One had a recreation of a couple's story of Bigfoot pelting their remote wooded cabin with rocks and then ultimately appearing at their door when they opened it. I've watched this on YouTube, and the creature shows up in the fakiest mask people have ever made. But it scared me more than anything else I've ever seen on a screen, because I knew Bigfoot lived in my general vicinity. I went to bed every night for a while, convinced he would emerge from the tiny suburban forest patch in the backyard, scale the side of my house, smash through my second floor window, and beat me up. Why would he beat you up, John? I have no idea, parenthetical questioner. As the years passed, I came to respect and admire Bigfoot. For the same reason, ghosts held such appeal. There is a world beyond that which we know. And I might really be comfortable in this world, in the deep woods, where Bigfoots have a whole society probably, and most likely some buildings. A brain like mine might be okay there and accepted, not to live there, just to visit sometimes, camping. Bigfoot represented hope that there was more to the world than the life I was forced to live. Now I approach these phenomena more anthropologically, interested in the believers more than the objects of their belief. To hear from the diehard believers is to pry open my own mind and get ever so gently triggered into imagining thinly disguised alternate realities, and to take tiny vacations, occasionally at my desk at work, from the present and hopefully not lone reality. If there aren't any good Bigfoot or ghost videos surfacing, I'll make do with UFOs or conspiracy theories for a while.